as a Toastmaster. Ed will be breaking ice for the second time in his life tonight. This will be Ed's icebreaker at this club, Voices of Manatee. Ed Cleveland, speech titled, Man of Many Names, Ed Cleveland. We'll cut that.
Woo! Thank you.
I'll get you on the flip side.
What name do you answer to when someone calls you? You may very well want to know, what name do I answer to when I'm called? Over the course of time, I've been called a lot of different names, and you can take that for whatever it's worth. But it should be obvious to you by now that I've never been called late for dinner. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters and guests, I started when I was a child. Grew up in a small town in Michigan called Durand. When I was a young boy, I was called Eddie. Grew up in high school, it was called the Durand Railroaders. Our mascot was not a lion or a tiger or a bear. It was a steam engine.
Oh.
We were the Durand Railroaders. Our colors were blue and white. When I played baseball and basketball in high school, I was called True Blue. Yeah. Then I went to college. Grew up a little bit more. Went to Olivet Nazarene University in Bourbonnais, Illinois. Majored in business administration and speech communications. There, I was generally called Ed. I sang in a Southern Gospel Quartet. I traveled around the Midwest, singing and speaking in churches on weekends. That is, I did, until the fall and winter of 1969, when I drew number 38 in the lottery for the draft. No, that's not a winning number. Because when I came back to school over Christmas break to take an interim course in microbiology, I read in the paper that they were working on number 29 on the draft. I headed off to the Air Force recruiter, because I'm only about half as dumb as I look. When I got to basic training, they called me Emmett Cleveland! And generally in that tone of voice. I was a weather observer in the Air Force and was able to travel around the world. I was stationed in North Carolina, and Illinois, and Indiana. And as I progressed through the ranks, I was called Sarge. I returned to college and continued to work at an ambulance, because when I was in high school, I was the youngest ambulance attendant in the state of Michigan. I have no idea what name they called me when I was on that ambulance, but it always seemed to be late at night. But when I came back to work on an ambulance, emergency medicine was now emergency medicine. It had changed. I became one of the first EMTs and paramedics in the state of Illinois. Joined the Bourbonnais Fire Department, and then I became known as Firefighter Paramedic Cleveland. While I was going to college, I worked in the trauma center in Kankakee, Illinois, where they called me almost Dr. Cleveland, because we all thought we knew it all. I was still young. When I was in college, right after I got out of college, my friend wanted me to take out his fiancée's roommate. You know, it was one of those, oh, she's really pretty. And that's almost always the kiss of death on a blind date. We got married the summer after her graduation, and she calls me honey. After college, my father thought that I really ought to take that college education that he and my VA benefits had helped pay for and get a real job. So he introduced me to a company that his company did business with, and I became a regional sales manager. But I was gone a lot. In the first 9 months after we got married, I put 66,000 miles on my brand new company car. The people I dealt business with, they called me Mr. Cleveland. My wife, she called me Missing in Action. And with the promise of a firefighter paramedic job and a teaching job for her, we moved to Florida. Now, how all that worked out, well, that's fodder for a different speech. But here we found what we were looking for. I joined the West Side, now the West Manatee Fire Department, and once again was called firefighter. Over the course of my career, I also became known as lieutenant and captain and battalion chief and assistant chief and then chief. My friends with whom I taught leadership and management around the country, they called me Cleve, and many of them still do. After a few years of marriage, my wife and I had 2 beautiful children. Our daughter Alyssa is a paramedic RN at Blake in the Trauma Center. Our son Alan, he's an air traffic controller and an Air Force vet out at Oakland Center in California. They call me Dad, and I'm really proud of that one. Everyone needs a hobby, and it has to be more than just going on a cruise. So I'm an amateur radio operator, N4NTY. I've contacted 314 different countries and islands around the world. These days, now retired from the fire department, I still do some consulting, but most of the time, we spend our time helping people go on amazing cruises in the Caribbean, Alaska, European river cruises. And generally, when I'm on a cruise, people just call me Lucky. So what do I answer to when someone calls me? Well, I still answer to Chief when firefighters call me. I still answer to Cleve when I answer called by my fellow training guys. I get called Mr. Cleveland still when they're doing business. If we go on a cruise together, you can bet you can call me Lucky then too. But what do you want to call me? Well, you can call me Ed, you can call me Cleve, or you can just call me Toastmaster, because that's what I want to be as I build my skills with all of you. Thank you very much. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Timer, put a minute on the clock. Write down some comments for Ed, which he certainly appreciate. We will read them. And just a heads up, I decided it would be a great idea tonight to move the word of the day in between the
That's a good concept. I like that. Yeah.